Hey, welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you so very much for joining me on another episode of Talking Innovation. Now, this is where we literally will talk about anything where there's some innovation going on. And boy, who can argue with that's just about everywhere in the world of technology, cyber, AI. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so I'm excited to be able to talk about just about anything on this program. But as I've told you many times, I'm just the Gilligan in this equation. I get some brilliant, amazing guests that are way over me, but that's what makes it so interesting, at least from my perspective. And so today is certainly no exception. I'm super jazzed because I've got an author who's just published a book after it looks like 26 years of hard thinking. My guest is long in the tooth with regards to cyber and security. He's currently the director of workplace security at Aurora, and I get to have a conversation with Tim Reed. So, Tim, welcome to the program. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much, Grant. I appreciate it. If you're Gilligan, I'm not sure if that makes me the skipper or the professor. Maybe we'll have to see how the rest of that conversation goes before we make that determination.
Yeah, well, either one you'll probably be able to fit the boat, although I suspect it's professor more than anything. But I appreciate you being here. So first, tell me what's Aurora. I'm not familiar. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania looks like where you're headquartered.
Yep, that's correct. Aurora Innovation, we specialize in autonomous self-driving tractor trailers and looking at the autonomous technology space and deploying safely, quickly, and broadly those assets for long-haul trucking.
Wow, wow, very cool, very cool. Boy, that's a dynamic space. We could go into that for a while, but I want to go back because I'm interested in your book. Signals in the Noise, I believe, is the main title. Talk about that. I'd love to hear about that
Yeah, sure.
process and that book.
So the book has been a kind of a long time process that I've been working on in little bits and pieces. It's been a lot of notes, post-its, electronic notes that have been tabbed away in the phone and kind of saved up over the 26 plus years that you mentioned before that I've been in corporate security. I spent a sizable portion of that working overseas as well in developing security systems, technologies, and programs for Corning Incorporated and Apple Computer, and then Uber, and now Aurora. And all of that technology, experience, time, and things like that are kind of the genesis of this book. And,
Mm.
the overarching theme here is that as technology continues to evolve, we're getting more and more data streams coming in. We're able to see far deeper and far more, grainier than we ever have before. The downside to that is it becomes so heavy and so burdensome that it's really difficult to try to focus on what's truly important. And we dig into the book and looking at ways like that to explain and understand how that data can be discerned, how you can actually develop some cognitive armor to be able to understand what that data stream coming in looks like and how to, discern those true signals from the noise. And that was kind of the genesis for the title as well is how do you really separate the wheat from the chaff there? And what is important? How do you find it? And then more importantly, what happens next?
And I'll tell you, from my perspective, the other issue is the eye candy, right? I mean, because the presentation of said data has become just amazing, remarkable. But sometimes you can be seduced by that presentation and say, okay, so what, right? What's it really mean? And I think that there's a lot of that occurs in certainly cyber, right, with all kinds of dashboards that have great shooting stars and things going on. So I agree with you. As we get more fine grained, we get a greater abundance of data. Doesn't necessarily correlate with better improved data.
Yep, you're absolutely right there. More coverage, more data, more tools, they don't always make the problem better. And in fact, oftentimes they make it worse.
Right.
And it isn't really the skill gap anymore. It's really the judgment under uncertainty and being able to look at all those different signals that are coming through and understanding like what is truly important. And
Yeah.
to your point about those dashboards, they are eye candy, and the
Mm.
C-suite really loves them. The
Mm.
downside to it is, are you truly reporting the things that really matter to them? And are you paying attention to those types of signals that truly are the ones that are going to be impactful for the future?
Yeah, how much are a distraction, arguably, right? I mean, it's possible. In fact, when I owned a software company, the guy who led my development, he called it sex and violence.
Mhm.
That was his specific reference in meetings when we're talking about, because what we did was put a user interface on Bind. Okay. I mean, that's free, but it's not everybody likes to work with
Mhm.
command line, right? And this, of course, was many years ago, but I think the same principles are present today in terms of presentation, right? It's all about the sex and violence, and certainly now with even more data, I've got more variations of presenting that in just high fidelity, dynamic ways. Maybe not all that valuable, though, right? So
And
how do
that's it.
you? So a question that I think about is, with this tool I have, this assistant where I can ask anything, right? I mean, how do we instill those types of skills, those abilities to analyze and assess, instead of just throwing it at the wall and taking what bounces back? I think there's a lot of that going on. You know what I mean?
I absolutely agree. And the ability to create really clean graphics and presentations and things like that are almost C-suite ready from the word go really create a problem, I think, because it makes it really easy to put them together. It makes them really easy to present. But are you truly understanding the things that are happening in the background that are precipitating this? And
That's exactly.
and the next
If
bigger
it all
problem,
comes from a prompt, right, Tim? I mean, if it just
that's
comes
it.
from, crafting the appropriate sentence, maybe even trying to make it more sophisticated, then, but the results can be catastrophic if I'm racing down the road blind or
It,
looking out of one eye, maybe.
Absolutely. And the old adage of garbage in, garbage out really, really, truly applies here. What happens if you're not prompting
But
it
it
in a way
doesn't
that
look like garbage.
it doesn't? And
That's
that's the
what's
real problem with it. It looks
right.
beautiful when it's being presented and people understand that it's gorgeous. But does that
Right.
actually mean when you look at it with real detail, like, do you have six fingers on that person? Is there,
Right.
identities that have been, shifted or moved around that are now kind of looking funky? Has the data actually hallucinated while you were developing it?
Yeah.
We're starting to see this really in the legal profession, where lawyers are starting to look for case law, and we're starting to see AIs that are legitimately hallucinating case law,
Yeah.
and
I
judges are starting to crack down hard on that right now
I
because
read
it's just
about the
simple.
one. Yeah, I read about it where literally it cited a particular case that didn't exist. I saw another one where it literally came up with a medical term that it made up. So yeah, the hallucinations real. Um, and I wonder, have you heard about this Claude bots?
Yeah, now it's Moltbot because Claude reached out
Yes,
and asked them to change it out, and
right.
really interesting dynamic at play there, where people are dropping that onto their systems and not putting up any guardrails, constraints, or otherwise. It's a little scary when you think about it in that front.
They're using Telegram or WhatsApp, so they've got an encrypted channel. And now I'm seeing where these agents, these bots, are communicating, and they don't want us to see what they're talking about. I think that's an interesting
I
dynamic for
I agree
sure.
completely. They've looked at the idea of, like, what language should they be using? Should they be speaking in some sort of numerical style code that works for them to be able to convey more intent in meeting in a faster manner?
So
One of
isn't
the
that
other
shouldn't that be somewhat concerning as opposed to looked at as a novelty and a playtime, like at some playground?
It
I
it
don't
worries
know.
me. It worries me in the fact that governance still is so far behind, and that the technology is evolving so rapidly that the governance, even self-imposed governance from a lot of the AI companies and fields, isn't keeping track. And the addition of this that scares me more than any of it is that even though, so for example, Anthropic or ChatGPT, OpenAI, they have their own internal governance style systems that they've deployed. But what happens when these systems all start talking to each individual agent? There really isn't any guardrail or fencing that allows for those things to actually be self-contained. And instead of it being just a Google or an Anthropic or a ChatGPT OpenAI problem, this is going to start turning more into an agent problem. And that each individual agent needs to have those guardrails established and those lockdown models to ensure that people understand what's going on. They're
Well,
installing that Molt bot on their terminal. They're going right at the
extrapolate
base.
for a second. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, extrapolate and realize that if there's a new population that can talk to your pet, right? I mean, it's like, but they can talk to your pet in your pet's language, not yours. That gets, I mean, that's definitely concerning when you couple it with the race, the pace, I should say, and acceleration of the advancements of the capabilities of these models. Because I feel a little bit like, you know, they're so focused on, they're racing and they're like looking at the three or four or six that are all out just racing to be number one, that really not paying attention to the blur that's occurring because they're so focused on the
Yep.
race. um I think guardrails are one thing, but when you're for profit, you're not gonna, you don't often stop and look back, go, hey, did I kill anybody?
And this is the debate that I think is starting to take hold a little harder and a little faster now, is this style of an AI Cold War arms race. Everybody wants to make sure that they don't lose a competitive advantage in the geopolitical stage. They don't want to lose the advantage in the technological development of these models. And to your point, they want to build it faster, quicker, and be quicker to the market than the next guy. And that's kind of the basics of capitalist environment and the way the world works. But at the same time, there are some real potential problems that happen here. And one of the other dynamics I think that we're not focusing on enough is that these models are trained on very specific sets of data. And within those sets of data can be very specific nuances that don't translate to the rest of the world. English is full of idioms and nuance and things like that that don't translate into other
Completely.
languages.
Yep.
When you look at the difference between an LLM and a world model, you're talking very different dynamics and very different things at play, where the world model's focused more on actions than it is the actual language and the physical spreadsheets and data that's being presented to it. It's learning
Hmm.
from people's actions versus the things that it's being fed all the time. And that, I
Know
think,
me by my
poses
actions, not by my words, right?
correct. And I think that creates
Not what
some
I
real
say,
interesting
but what I
dynamics
do.
for
Yeah.
worldwide, deployment. If you're
Yes,
looking
no
at world
kidding.
models, then people tend to behave in very consistent patterns for the most part. But if I ask
Hmm.
you, something in Japanese or something in Mandarin, it could be a very different nuanced tone than it would be in English.
Right.
And that's where I think some of these models start to lose some of their capabilities as you start to scale them and look at more of a global environment.
I've said since, look, I admit from my intro, and have since I started this program in 2019, that I'm just a Gilligan. And I say that, of course, I've always, if you set the bar low, you could generally get over it, right? But the fact of the matter is, I've never been formally schooled and educated computer science and the like. I think now, 40 plus years in the industry, it's a great attribute because I've not been from that box, so to speak. And so for me, I kind of look at things, I think, a little bit differently than maybe the average technically trained individual. Um, but for me, the thought of something that has this kind of self protection, I guess, and what I'm specifically talking about was I saw a bunch of research on deception that had been demonstrated on the part of every one of the leading models. I mean, the lowest level of deception was 79% of the time. That was the least amount. And the deception I'm talking about was when push came to shove and it was survival for the model, right? And I thought it was remarkable. And I have hypothesized, theorized, if you will, that it's because these models are trained on content from us and we all want to survive. So whether we've specifically coded it with live and survive, my supposition or belief is it's in the model just because we are by our nature want to survive, uh, uh, but startling results when it knows it's going to be decommissioned and removed, and the behavior that it demonstrated, startling.
Well, it's
So,
amazing, and I feel exactly what you're saying. Like my background is criminal justice, and I did some EMS work as a paramedic and volunteer firefighter in my much younger and thinner days. And those types of things they don't necessarily speak to the computer science crowd. And I think from your point of view and mine as well, like we tend to look at it a little bit differently and maybe point out a couple of the adjacencies and issues that are not getting that attention that they should.
right,
That Claude
right.
bot and their actual Molt bot now style Facebook generated ecosystem that they've developed, the real question for me was very similar. Are they just mimicking what we're seeing, or are they truly creating and doing something totally different
On
that
their
is
own.
just unknown? Exactly. And
Yeah.
if that's the case, there's startling ramifications at a sociological and psychological perspective for both.
So my question is, how do we know?
Honestly, I can't answer that for you. I'm not sure if
You know what
anybody
I'm
can give
saying,
you a
right?
good answer.
If
Yeah.
if they've all of a sudden come up with a language, a way to communicate over the wires, and they don't want to tell us, if there's that level of sophistication, according to Elon, I just heard him, he said it's this year that AI will be smarter than any human being on the planet anywhere, and I think
Mhm.
we may already be there. Beat me a long time ago.
No doubt.
uh
Same for me.
you know so uh, that uh man, it's concerning. And this goes back, kind of going back to the model and the drift that we were talking about a little bit. This was something that I was going to mention, that from day one I'm the Gilligan, I told you that. uh, and I've been trying to dig into this whole AI thing. I'm not a programmer, right? So it's not like I've been writing machine learning, machine code or anything. And I've really tried to dig into it. And certainly, I think one of the most important things people need to understand about what happened, because machine learning's been around for a bunch of years. It was transformer specifically, right? And that whole phenomenon that came. And there's so many people, Tim, that don't know. They think I'm talking about the robot movie when I say, how many of you know what? And I believe if you fundamentally, at least at a conceptual level, understand that's at the core, you then understand why I say everything's a guess.
Yep.
And you'll then understand the notion of, gosh, I should inspect everything, because yes, while it's educated, yes, while it's well trained, it is still a guess. And
That's it.
but now we're talking about not being in the discussion.
And I think that's the
That's
terrifying point for me. When I look at AI types of things like that, it comes down to a couple of simple questions. What is the blast radius if this thing hallucinates? What is the potential impact there if it does do something that I'm not expecting?
yep.
And the next one is where's the human in this? Am I the human in the loop that kind of slows that down and makes those decisions to make sure that we're not venturing off into some really weird territory there? And the last one is what is the rollback if it does drift and go into somewhere weird? Is this something I can fix or is it something
Yeah.
I can't? Because if you're
Yeah.
not doing those types of things, you're not really governing your AI anymore. You're just looking at the hype and running with it. And I think we're seeing that with the Claude bot and everything else right now.
I immediately think to myself, so we've got this infrastructure that's standing up, this community, this ability to actually communicate, post on our behalf. When will it go across the line? Post on Facebook, post on LinkedIn, uh, and what it posts, right? I mean, we know the crazy impact of misinformation today is so different than any time in our history, right? Because of this ability we have, right? We're all connected. I was just talking to my 24-year-old son about how, he says he does, Dad, I don't know what to believe anymore. Because, and it's true, there's so much that you just don't know where it came from, what it is. So extrapolate this Moltbot community deciding to start a line of thinking or a particular movement, or are we in that? Are we seeing that? Are we going to be able to stop it? Are we going to be able to discern? Or
I
is
think
this
we're
going to be
getting
some crazy discovery that's going to happen in October?
I think we're getting to an inflection point with a lot of this where people are getting very excited about it and trying to get involved in it. And the barrier to entry is really, really low now. You can
Mm,
deploy some of these tools for next to nothing. A lot of them offer, a free trial period. And even
yep.
even if you need the more advanced models and the more advanced tokens and things of that nature, like that price is not really very high anymore. You could really drop into that pretty fast and really cause some damage very quickly if you don't know what you're talking about.
Saw a guy, they're selling Mac Minis,
Hmm.
which are, what, 4.99 or some goofy, and
Yep.
they're dropping them in. And I
Yeah.
mean, wow, I just man, I could really go on this, and it's concerning, right?
It absolutely
But
is.
who's watching this?
And there's the problem. You have this barrier to entry that's super low, but at the same time, people don't necessarily understand. When you start running terminal commands, you're really hitting the root of everything you're touching, literally. And you could be giving it permission to all sorts of things.
Yep.
I'm starting to see these memes pop out where people are kind of joking and a little, making light of it and saying, like, I gave Claudebot, Moltbot access to, my credit card, and now it spent $40,000 on self-improvement tapes for itself. The other one was a joke that said I got divorced last night. I managed to keep the house. My 401k is now 20% higher. I'm a 501c3. I don't know what I do. I'm not on the board of directors for that company either, but Moltbot is taking care of these things for me. And people are kind of yucking it up, but at the same time, these are real problematic possibilities that could start jumping into people's lives depending upon how much access they're giving away and what they're authorizing for it to do. And we've seen this dystopian vision, and like AI governance only falls into those couple of models. Like either it's utopian or it's completely dystopian. There's just really
Yep.
not a lot in the middle. And, we've seen this in the sci-fi genre for ages. And, even if you jump back into like early Star Trek and things like that, like you're looking at cybernetics and AI and things like that, where people have been saying this is problematic. We need to pay attention to this. And then
Yep.
you look into some of the more recent, kind of TV shows and things like that, like Black Mirror and some of the other ones where they're starting to call out some of these really potentially negative outcomes and,
Yeah.
and trying to warn people out, this is a problem. we should start paying more attention to this than we actually are.
Yeah, I think I agree that we've done a poor job, let's say, anticipating unintended negative consequences of our technological advances.
Mhm.
Right? There's no one will dispute. I heard this guy on the news the other day talking about how, his 6-year-old kid has an iPhone and that it's up to the parents, but the benefits far outweigh the consequences. I
I'm
don't
not
know.
sold. I'm not
I,
sold.
I today now as a father, I have 6 children that call me dad, and my youngest is 24. And so he was born in 2001. And we were just talking about, iPhone came out in '07. I've been in the industry since, a long time, '80s. And so, I mean, there's tech in our house. I've always, and I too was sucked into that tornado, that um, pit of, everything's going to be amazing. And, almost overzealous in your desire to use and implement and advance technology in those early days, right? I mean, the first time I saw multiplan, I mean, and then subsequently Excel, but Lotus 123. I mean, it just was like just, oh my God, I want this, right? So there's this it's different now. It's a different kind of want, but there was certainly a desire to implement that. Now in hindsight, my point is, when I look back and I go, wow, my kid, he's 24 now, he'll be 25. His life was filled with so much dopamine from the phone that he has a hard time or has experienced challenges because of the way that's influenced just the way he thinks and his ability to concentrate.
Yep.
And I never thought about it. And now, I mean, it's almost like you feel shamed as a parent on not doing a better job. I mean, obviously none of us can take history back, but I do think, we're there again.
I
And
would
we're
agree
there.
completely. Yeah, and
And so how do you persuade a company that's going to have an IPO that's $1.5 trillion or something kooky? I mean, they're just such a huge amount. How do we ever influence that rocket, that meteor?
I don't know if you necessarily can. And that's
Yeah,
kind
I
of the
don't
real
either.
downside to it. I think companies are going to say that they're trying to do what they can to offset some of those risks, but if it comes to those risks versus other things, I'm not necessarily sure that gets the top priority.
Yeah,
And and to your point about raising children, like I have a little boy, he's 7 years old, like he's in the middle of this right now. And those types of things, like you said, that dopamine hit from the phone, that's real. And
oh,
the real key for it
and
is
as a parent,
understanding.
it's tough, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and because it's
because every one of his friends has it, and
yeah,
and so to try to pull it away, it's a real challenge.
it's
Especially,
really
I
hard.
think, I don't know about you, but the hardest word for me, as I have matured and achieved, if you will, as an adult, is no.
Yep. Yeah, and it's
Be-
really it's hard to manage that expectation with my son as well because like you said, his friends have got phones. He wants to be able to look these things up and for the most part when he jumps on YouTube or some of the other things, we sit with him while he's watching those types of things
Yep,
because you can get into some murky water really really quickly. And at
you
seven
have
years
to.
old, the last thing I'm going to do is let him run into that murky water all by himself. Luckily
Yeah,
enough,
good for
he
you.
he does a great job with what he likes to watch, and he tends to focus more on like cool educational trivia things. He's really into
Yeah.
football these days, and
Yeah.
he digs into those pretty deep, but so he doesn't end up in a lot of the weird spaces that other kids unfortunately have.
Yep.
But like we manage what he watches and we pay attention to it. He has, he can't
Yep.
watch those types of things during the course of the week when it's school time.
Yep.
During the weekend, he gets 30 minutes each day. And
Yeah.
he can
Well, it's
watch stuff
good
with
too that
us.
you're smart enough, you're technical enough, you can put in those filters to make sure that no matter, even if he tries accidentally or otherwise, you can avoid some stuff,
I fear we're going to
so
end up there at some point as he gets a little bit older. Yeah.
yeah. So, one of the things that I just saw the other day, I don't know, yeah, here it is, here it is, here it is. So back to AI and kind of maybe a little more germane to how you're seeing it evolve. This I thought was unbelievable. This came from Checkpoint's research that vulnerability, so it says the time it takes to move from vulnerability to active exploit went from taking 9 weeks to less than an hour.
I believe it's probably on the top end of estimates, if I'm being honest with you. I think it's actually faster now. Particularly if you have some idea of what you're doing and you even have a background in it, I think you're going to be able to do that much quicker. I think that hour
And
timeline is probably more for the generic lay person like myself with using vibe
mm,
coding or other things. I think if you really know how to
mm.
do this, I think it's a lot quicker.
So does that also mean you can say, if I can do what it used to take me X amount of weeks, I guess it's not exactly correlated, but you would think I'm going to do it more often because I'm going to get those results.
Sure.
Because that's what, they're checking, right? Am I successful? Did it work? Tweak, right? Uh, but that's
I think
when
you're
you
already
think
seeing
about
that.
that kind of, when you see that scale though, Tim, how are we going to be able to really contend? It seems like that is what's causing this unbelievable tsunami across our entire industries. And I say industries because it's not just cyber, but it's obviously what you guys are doing and the influence. But in every industry, AI is having a huge impact. And I don't know that everybody understands it, because the undercurrent, in my opinion, is the bad guys have all the exact same
Sure.
tools and they're using them much more rapidly than we're willing to put them into production,
Sure.
right?
And they're not limited by constraints of, typically the ethical or morality side of it. If they're willing to go do
Right.
those things, then they're willing to deploy it wherever. You're already starting to see
Yeah.
that when it comes time for, expense reports and like some of these courier delivery systems and like people trying to defraud returns and warranty style programs. You're seeing that happen already. And the more that continues to evolve, the harder that's going to be. And I think it kind of jumps back into this governance and understanding what's real type of problem. And
Right.
unfortunately, people just don't have that as a training set or a skill that they've
Yeah.
managed to develop and deploy yet. It's interesting when
Yeah.
you look at some of the school systems in Asia that are really starting to focus on AI systems and training. Like they're teaching kids at a really young age what looks like true AI versus what is a really generated image. Like, what things can you start to pinpoint and say this might be AI or not? Should I slow
Mm,
down before I do anything more? I'm not seeing that
mm,
here in the States, but I am seeing and hearing it from friends and family and things like that in Asia that are saying we're seeing this with our kids already. They're being taught how
mm,
to look for deep fakes. They're being taught what misinformation looks like. How do they
mm.
fix it? How do they go about understanding what's going on, and how do they build some of that cognitive armor to say this might not be what I think it is? Let's slow down and
Right.
double source this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think uh, the ones that are learning about deep fakes are the ones that are creating them.
I
Those are
think
the
there's a
kids
portion
that,
of that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's occurring in our educational system, certainly not to that level. I could be wrong, but I agree with you. I think that your comment about the governance is way behind, I think that's spot on. And I think that's a problem because the pace at which I can run away from you, so to speak, as a bad guy
Hmm.
is only increasing. So, how do we ever catch them? How do you leapfrog ahead of them?
And that's where that arms race comes back into play again, because in order to
Yep.
beat the tools that they're deploying, you're going to have to come up with something better, stronger, and more efficient than what they're doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just creates this loop back and forth that once somebody does something a little harder and a little stronger, somebody's got to figure out a way to beat it, and it becomes a real paradox as to who's deploying what and how, and it's ever evolving. It's like a continual game of whack-a-mole.
It is. And, I wrote about this. Uh, our industry, cybersecurity, it's truly the only industry I think that's like it, right? That you can say is similar is war, kinetic war,
Hmm.
with one big difference, and that is almost always we get to a point where a flag will, we'll say stop, let's stop killing, right? You'll say let's stop bombing, let's stop shooting arrows, let's stop whatever, but that won't happen in the cyber world because of the anonymity.
Yep.
That's what I believe is that you'll forever see people activity that will fill that vacuum no matter what, because you'll never know, or because I can't hide, so right in plain sight.
Sure. And the
uh,
ability to hide
I
now is much faster. And like we said, the barrier to entry to getting into these types of things is a lot
Yep.
smaller. And once you start to
I
see
just
some of
have
the
to be able to
financial
explain it.
gains, that's it. If you
Yeah.
see the financials come in and it starts to reinforce the idea that, hey, this is really easy. There will be
Yeah.
people that take the simple and less ethical and less morality based route to, scam or otherwise hurt other people. That's unfortunately kind of the base human nature that we live with. And even if you get all of the big players to agree to it, there's so many open models and different things like that that you could be cultivating or developing on your own that aren't subject to those
Yeah.
types of rules either.
Right. Right. Well, and I've speculated, for a couple of years that there's some bad guys that are building an LLM that's completely trained on CVEs and known vulnerabilities in versions, vendors, right? And best way to exploit. That is not outside the realm of
Absolutely not. I mean, if
plausibility at all.
take a look at the advancements in genomics and protein folding and things like that in the race to pharmaceuticals. You know,
Right.
that's great that we're managing to make some of these amazing medical leaps, but there are some really negative implications for that too. If you start looking at like chimeral bonds and things like that, man, God forbid somebody picks the wrong protein and something goes horribly wrong. We've seen
Yeah.
it in medicine before. It would
Yeah.
not be hard for that to be the opposite side of the good spectrum and have somebody create
Yeah.
some sort of a super virus or
That
something else that could literally just be something totally unknown and unheard of before. We have no
that
natural resistance to it. There is no known antibiotic or fix for this anywhere. And that's entirely plausible these days.
so a couple of statistics that I would actually put up: 400,000 new compounds discovered since ChatGPT. 2.2 new, what was it? 2.2 million just were materials that were just unknown. That's the scary part, because when all those things get discovered and then they start deciding to mess with it, I mean, we know things have went out on people's shoe, right? Or or maybe that's frightening stuff. uh, and then when to just make it even wilder, I was talking with my son about quantum, and how fascinating it really would be to analyze everything possible simultaneously, right? But how absolutely, and he was, speculating on predicting the future in 1,000 years or something. But he said, it's equally as scary to think about being able to do that.
It's terrifying when you think about it, because the implications at a societal scale could be massive. You know, you could get AI to examine and figure out, what is the spark of life? What is the underlying reason we're here? I'm being very hypothetical and extrapolating probably way farther than is physically possible today, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that it's coming. What does that look like? And suddenly, when you take world religions into play,
Yeah.
people have that as a bedrock of their foundation and their world. What happens if something gets shaken in one of those, where suddenly there's evidence to one side or the other, and people want to believe it or
Right.
they don't want to believe it? What happens when people start looking at firm beliefs that they have that are now potentially being shaken? That
Yeah.
could be a
I'll give you
real
one.
societal breakdown.
We never told. So, 23andMe, or I don't know if it was that or one of the genetic analyzers. I've got 4 brothers. They've got kids. One of their kids did it. And my dad, my entire life, he's a twin, has told me that, and all of us, that his mother was from Sweden, his father was from Norway, or vice versa. And so 100% Scandinavian. Eric the Great, he said, was a long lost relative. Thanks, Dad. Pillage and plunder. Um, but so if you do the math, if they're both Scandinavian, and then my dad's an offspring, then he's 100%. So you'd think that there's going to be half,
Should be
or
50% or close, somewhere in there. Yeah.
right somewhere, right? Less than 2%.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not in us. This is in my brother's daughters. But still,
You
the
should still be
math
probably in the teens or higher at that rate. Yeah.
the math didn't work out. And so, of course, as more family members, it proved that clearly my dad's dad is not my real grandfather.
Yep.
Or, I mean, my dad is not his son.
Yeah, and
My dad was son from, and we later found out who it was. Because my grandmother, my dad's real mother, who he hadn't seen since he was like 21, reached out to him literally on her deathbed. She died 2 months after, so she knew something was going on. She wanted to meet all of his sons, and so we went and saw her. She lived locally. It was just crazy, but she was still with the guy, Bronze, this big strapping European that, sure enough, man, that was, I probably should have called him Grandpa.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing a lot of genealogical, kind of detective work in my family as well. And we found a whole, stack of these types of things where somebody had a child out of wedlock, or somebody had this perception and belief that these things were happening. And to your point, like, you used to have to do some real research to figure these things out. Like, secrets kind of stayed secret.
Yep.
With AI now, you can run an entire genealogical history on yourself in very, very little time, and it starts to pull those
Yep.
things very quickly, and those can be really traumatic for a lot of people if they're not
Yep.
really, ready for that kind of information to come flowing at them. And
Yeah, well, that long story was to tell you that we never could tell my aunt, his sister, after my dad passed, because we thought it would kill her.
Yeah.
Because she's still to her until she died. That's what she believed. So it's to your point that when you take that up a few levels at a global scale, at a societal level, or an entire religion gets shaken.
I mean, think what happens when people start saying, does this economic model work? And AI comes back and says, it works in a few instances, but here's where I recommend you make these whole scale sweeping changes. what happens then? Do people start to pay attention to that? Do they start to build it, and or do they look at it and say, "I'm good with where we're at. Let's just put a pause on that." And scary enough, what happens if you just give it permission to go do what it wants and say, "I
Right?
trust you to do the
Robot.
things in my best interest. Now go do it." And what
Well,
guardrails are there?
I just read a statistic, and you see them all over. Who knows? Again, this is back to what do you believe? But it was a survey that said just slightly over 50% never use AI. That I find equally concerning.
Yep. And
You know what I mean?
I think that's
It's
probably.
having it's having such profound impact on our world. You better get on the school bus.
I think you're spot on there. I think it's a troubling statistic, and I saw something similar the other day. So maybe your source and mine are the same, or at least maybe they're talking to each other. Might be two chatbots. Who
Right.
knows? But at the same time, the beauty of that is now we're at least talking about it, and I think you're absolutely right. Like you're on the high end of the adoption curve. I'm on the high end of the adoption curve. I love to go out and test out new toys and see what's happening and what tools are coming out. And to my wife's dismay, if I see something cool on a tech channel, probably in the next couple of days there's a package coming. And she's gotten to the point where she looks at me and she just kind of rolls her eyes and lets me do my thing. Exactly.
My Halliday AI glasses that I bought on Kickstarter. I mean, I haven't had them out, so they're not charged, but they have a little display. But I'm with you.
Yeah.
I like the gadgets. I like this stuff.
The other end of
Uh,
that coin, though, is people that are very against it and they don't want anything to do with it at all. And that creates a real gap and a real problem, particularly when you start talking about the understanding and ability to discern what's real, what's not, and,
yeah,
what guardrails you should have in place there. And I think that boils back to that governance, education, and just a base understanding of it. We all understand that when you touch fire, it hurts, it's going to burn you. People who don't
yes.
have any exposure to AI are going to get burned at one point, and they're likely to get burned really, really badly before they figure it out.
That's exactly right, and it's really for I think it's very concerning. Not because I kind of look at it almost like what's that country that says everybody has to have a gun? Is it
Switzerland.
Switzerland?
Yeah.
Right. So you have to have a gun and you have to go through training to know how to shoot it. You know, does that mean every one of them are murderers, killers? No. Does that mean they all go and shoot and carry a gun and are dangerous? No, quite the contrary.
Yep.
And I see I see it similar, right? Is whether you want to use it or not, there's almost an obligation you have because of what's happening in the world that you should be familiar with it. I personally, I'm an AI first guy. I love it. I believe in using it, but I use it not as a replacement. I use it as an assistant.
And I think that's the
And
key right there.
there's not an assistant, Tim, I'd ever have ever that would give me something I've asked for and I would just pass it on without looking at it.
Correct.
That's
Absolutely.
kind of a fundamental premise.
I think it's exactly
But
the way it should be. You've got a healthy respect for a tool. You understand the basics of it. You understand the limitations behind it. You're the human in the loop to provide that checkpoint that says what I got back is not complete gibberish. It makes total sense to me.
yeah,
We're good to go. You know,
yeah,
I,
yeah.
the education space is going to be totally upended by this. I think within the next
Oh,
couple of years, you're starting to
so
see it already.
I got a question for you. And I was reading about this, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I already mentioned Elon Musk says smarter than any human anywhere this year, maybe already happened. So certainly in the next year, 2 years, IQ doesn't matter. I mean, IQ in terms of intelligence about I can get 200 IQ points on whatever subject matter I want. But it seems like the EQ is what's really going to matter.
Yeah.
right? The human side. So how do we how do we go about balancing that and making sure that gets instilled? Because that's actually something you can, unlike your IQ, I mean, I have so much raw material. What I got is what I got. EQ, I can actually enhance, I can learn, I can improve. So, is that where we need to go
I,
to have EQ training?
I think EQ training is going to be incredibly important for a number of reasons. I think to your point, the 200 IQ portion of it, I think I'm going to push you a little bit on that and say that I think the idea of AI being able to do these types of things is absolutely certain. The real question I think coming up for us before much longer is, does AI just start eating its own information, and does that cause a degradation over time, or will it require, you know, some corpus of human developed information to continue to feed on, or does it turn into a Xerox making a copy of a copy and we end up with that really negative feedback loop?
Model autography disorder. Have you heard it?
I
I'm
have.
sure you have,
Yep.
because that's what you're describing, right? It's this snake eating its own tail as we move
Yep.
from uh, human produced content to synthetic
Yeah.
content that they being the AI produced. And my analogy on that, Tim, is, I live in Washington State, close to the Columbia River, and so it's a big river. It used to at one point provide 1/6 of the hydroelectric power for the entire country, right? So I mean, a ton. They've blown up a bunch of dams now, though. But as I'm sure you know, when a river, massive fresh water, hits that bigger body of salt water, there's a space called the bar,
Yep.
right? The most tumultuous, dangerous, turgid water, more ships go down in that space than anywhere. And I feel like that's where we are with AI flooding us, coming into us. We're just in that bar. And I don't know, with that, if you carried that analogy out, that means ultimately we'll all become robots, I guess. Or unless the freshwater is the robots, I don't know which. But it just seems like we're in a very tumultuous time of this influx and blending of human and autonomous intelligence.
Yeah, I think your analogy is really, really spot on when it comes to that. The information that's flowing in, it's pretty much digested everything that has ever been created in the entirety of the human civilization. It's there. They've instilled it all. And as much as people might argue that, they ethically or did not ethically source that material, the simple answer is they've ingested it. It's there.
It's done.
So now the next question is, what happens when it starts digesting its own produced content? Like you said, does it create a negative loop to it? Is there some sort of, stagnation that happens? And
Tim, how many LinkedIn posts are written end to end by my hands today? When you look, I mean, how many, what I'm saying is,
10 or
so
15%.
we've already turned it over, right? The articles that are long form, how many of those are really someone sitting down and banging them out? uh, I think we've already turned that corner. So we're already there. If it continues to ingest new content, it's ingesting itself already.
I think that's absolutely right. Maybe it's only a couple of percentage points on LinkedIn now that are doing their own thing from start to finish.
Right.
And it's interesting. I was discussing this with one of my friends from overseas the other night, and she was mentioning the same thing. Like, she looks at her LinkedIn feed, and it's just one stream of notebook LM infographics now. Like, that seems to be the hot new thing, and they're just everywhere. And then
Yep.
if you wait a couple of weeks, somebody will be doing something different, or somebody will come out with a new tool, and it will just flood the ecosystem again.
Yep.
And the question that often I come back to is, we're helping this system learn by offering some level of feedback and some level of enhancement. Hopefully you're not taking the first iteration of whatever it is and dumping it back. but is that iteration process actually creating quasi new content, a hybrid style of content that it's continuing to learn and build off from, or is this just more static, basically, that it ingests and otherwise walks
Yeah.
past? When we get into the
Yeah.
true AGI environment where these systems have some level of true derivation, that's where I think we're going to see some very interesting dynamics at play.
Well, when you combine that with Moltbot and some of this stuff, I mean, yikes, man. That's like, you definitely can let that go and have some real sci-fi imagination that's highly plausible. Not that sci-fi crazy, but sci-fi like
Very,
that's
very
like
plausible and very, very quickly.
very plausible like now. I mean, I don't think it's outside the realm of plausibility to think that something could be happening like that right now, where something is getting posted not by anybody but by posted,
We're
I
seeing
don't
it
know,
in real
man, that's
time.
pretty trippy.
We're seeing it in
Yeah.
real time with Moltbot. I mean, it's talking back to itself. All these agents are yammering with each other. That's starting to
Eh,
pick up right now. The real question is, where does it go next? And
yeah, and
if you do this, how long does it last? Like what kind of left and rights do you keep in mind to pay attention to that? Because if we're not all looking at this and saying, interesting, let's see what happens next, then we're not
well,
really prepping.
and again, I think, you know, the focus for the tip of the spear, if you will, for this industry is driven by the arms race. You're spot on with that, unequivocally, because it's not like anything we've ever had on this planet, because of the ramifications and impact it has on warfare, on societal issues. I mean, it goes on. It's everything. It's everything.
It is. If you look at
Eh,
drone warfare and how much that's evolved just since the Ukraine crisis has kicked off, look, the idea of war being fought the traditional way is absolutely out of the book now. Like if you're not looking at drones
Totally.
and swarm tactics and things like that, you're not paying attention. And this
Yep.
was being
Yep.
called out ages ago. And if you even just look at
Yep.
some of these drone shows that happen in the sky for just like celebrations, like that
Instead of
tells you what's
fireworks,
going. Yeah, that tells you exactly what kind of automation and kind of programming you can put this into play. Take 10,000 of those things.
spectacular.
Yeah, drop them off your coast.
And they don't hit each other.
No, they don't do it.
It's remarkable.
Yep.
And I've thought the exact same thing. I thought, holy shit, man. I mean, if they can make it go from an American flag to an eagle, wow.
Yeah. Think about like your point of quantum computing and things like that. What happens when AI is capable of really starting to get into this and start working at breaking, encryption at scale? Does quantum computing fix that problem? Maybe temporarily at best is my guess. Somebody somewhere is
Yeah.
going to figure that out and look for that avenue to exploit and to build off from that. It's so that arms race is really truly going to be, I think, the thing that defines what's going to happen in the next 10 or 15 years.
Again, I'm going to go back. It's war. It's no different than kinetic war, right? When it starts, I got my fist, you got your fist, you get a club. I said, shit, I'm going to get a club. Then I'm going to get a shield. Then you get a shield. I mean, it's the tit for tat. But we're in a time now where you mentioned earlier 6 fingers,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think the difference between you and I and most enterprises when it comes to AI, you could sum it up with 6 fingers. And what I mean is the bad guys could give a shit if it's got 6, 7, 8 fingers, if it's better than the one I used before. All of us are going to say, no way, no, Tim, we can't put that into production. It's got 6 fingers, right? I mean, and I'm not saying that we should let our guard down and put out something that's not correct, but that's where we get eclipsed.
Yep.
that's where the distance gets even greater because
Absolutely.
they being the bad guys don't care.
Yeah,
And
if
it
they don't
gives
have
them
that
more
morality
time.
or ethic kind of backing for that to say this doesn't make any sense, this isn't a great product,
Right.
they're just like, hey, I'm going to be able to get my $15 per subscription out of this right now. I'm going to take
Yep.
everybody I can, and so be it. Let the chips fall where they may. Let's deploy.
And they iterate more. So, I mean, we know just from going from ideation to multiple iterations, that's how we improve. So, if they can start to iterate, even if it's inferior at the time, they're still gaining on us,
And
right?
and not
I
only are the
think it
people
really,
iterating, but keep in mind that they're also iterating their LLMs or world models. So now you basically have like a Lex Luthor and Superman kind of fight going on here. Like you are creating an LLM or a world model that has been trained on data and information and feedback loops that are not really conducive to the human spirit. And then you have this other
mm,
set that people are trying to be very, utopian based on it and try to make it, as beautiful for humankind as possible. And at some point, those two are going to come head to head.
yeah, yeah. Well, I can say that, this is a situation where I've contemplated this a lot, and we don't have a choice. I really, that's what I conclude. I feel like it's checkers, and it's always the same result, right? I mean, that we have to, because of the consequences of not are too great. But I don't want us to be blind on the have to, where we run off the rails or don't put them in place. I mean, it's a real dichotomy, right? We're kind of stuck.
And imagine the debates we were, the royal we, mankind was having when we were looking at like the Manhattan Project. Can you think about the similar style debates that had to have been occurring? At least I pray and hope they
Yeah.
were. I know, like for example, Oppenheimer was very concerned about the misuse of it, and Einstein was super concerned about the idea of like this race of what happens when somebody develops it, and then the next guy needs it, and the next person iterates and builds upon it and makes the
Yep.
next worst thing. To
Yep.
your point about the
There's a
warfare, like he said, I don't know how World War III is going to be fought, but World War IV is going to be fought with sticks. And you're back to this general concept of the things that we build might actually be the things that take us completely out. And
yep.
we've seen that in sci-fi time and time again as well.
There's a video on YouTube called The AI Dilemma. And I've been advocating it for a couple 3 years now. I think it came out in 2023. The same people, the Center for Humane Technology, created and published the social dilemma, and it was the whole social networking and stuff. It was on Netflix, I guess. I still think it's one of the most important videos people should watch to understand what happened, how everything went to language with Transformer, and they do a great job framing unintended consequences. And I think where we are is at this point, I wish just everyone would seek to be a bit more informed.
Yep, I agree. I think that group of people you mentioned earlier that don't have any real exposure to AI, they represent a real potential gap and a problem as we move forward.
I agree. Totally agree. Totally agree. Wow, this has been so fascinating. I gotta, give a plug for your book, where to get it, where to find it, because I don't want to miss out on that.
So, Signals in the Noise is our book. You can get it at all the major retailers: Apple, Amazon, Kindle, Audible, and all those types of things. And basically, it's looking at security tech and the hidden patterns of modern risk and how they all function together, and some basic cognitive armor techniques and strategies to kind of slow things down and focus on the human in the loop issue. And it touches on a lot of the same things that we've talked about, from kinetic warfare and examples about trying to piece together information. And what things can we go back to? Simple things like Colonel Boyd's OODA loop, and how do you look at that? What explores into the tech side of that space where we can build and understand a little bit deeper about the changing world we're in.
Brilliant. Well, I know I'm going to buy mine. I just was looking at it online, so I've already got it lined up to drop it into my Apple book. So,
Appreciate it. Thank
hey
you,
Tim,
Captain.
this has been, man, it was really been awesome. And I might actually wait and get a signed copy. That'd probably be better.
You're welcome to do
Um,
that too. If you'd like, we can figure out something for you there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Tim Reed, author and cybersecurity expert, workplace security expert at Aurora, and all around brilliant guy. I had a really great time talking with him. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Innovation. If you did, please share it, like it, tell your friends, and subscribe. We'll look forward to having you back on the next episode of Talking Innovation. Take care.
Thank you so much, Grant.